You're listening to Booth Talk from the After Movie Diner, and quite honestly, I cannot believe that I'm about to introduce the guest that we have for this episode. I think my mind might have already imploded. However, I'll do my best. Anyone who's followed the After Movie Diner this long, for the last few years that we've been around, you will remember that one of our original co-hosts, John Wallace and myself, did a long-standing series on the Review podcast all about two particular actors who sort of became our shorthand for actors that we found fascinating and interesting and entertaining and enjoyable and weird and wonderful and esoteric and mad and jazz and all the great things. And those two actors were James Woods and Peter Weller. And Woods and Weller became a long-running series for us and very beloved, and we loved delving into those films. If you're not a fan, or if you've only seen a few movies, or if you're not familiar with the sort of former, as I said, long-running podcast series we did on Peter Weller, then you probably know him from Robocop. You probably know him from Buckaroo Banzai, Naked Lunch, maybe his stint on Dexter. Maybe you're a fan of The Last Ship if you've been watching that recently, or maybe you know him from Star Trek Into Darkness as Admiral Marcus, the J.J. Abrams sort of Wrath of Khan redo. But however, we know him from such wonderful video shop delights as films like Shakedown and Leviathan and Of Unknown Origin and 50-50 and things like that. Weird and wonderful and esoteric and mad films that just shone out from the video shop rental days on the VHS-filled shelves, and has long mesmerized us ever since. His voice is iconic, and he's played Batman in the animated series with that incredible voice. He's also a jazz musician who plays jazz with Jeff Goldblum, and as it turns out, a longtime friend of James Woods. We delve into all of this and more on this phenomenally cool, groovy, and story-laden interview with my hero, and hopefully now yours, Peter Weller. Dr. Weller. Hi, is this Mr. Weller?
Yeah, Dr. Weller.
Ah, Dr. Weller. Hi, how are you doing, sir? This is Jon Cross from the After Movie Diner.
Where are you calling from, then?
I'm calling from New York, but I have an English accent. I'm from England originally, but I've lived in New York the last 10 years.
And you moved from England to New York, okay.
Yeah, I actually moved from New York to Las Vegas, believe it or not, and then I moved to New York.
Good. Well, Dr. Weller, yeah. So
Sorry,
you didn't know I was a doctor?
I did know that you had done your PhD. I do apologize for not referring to you as doctor. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right. No sweat. Are you a golfer?
I'm not, sir. No, I'm not. I'm not a golfer. Are you a golfer? Do you like golf?
Yeah, and I'm watching my home course here that's been rained out. They have a big tournament there, the Genesis Open.
Okay.
One of the major, not major, but one of the more important golf tournaments. And it's rained out now, so that's the end of that.
So you have some time to talk today?
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show today. It's a real pleasure. I've been a big fan for a long time, and it's really great to have you on the show. The last in the last year, 3 of your movies of Unknown Origin, Shakedown, and Screamers have all received Blu-ray releases from Shout Factory. And these fantastic, diverse genre films are gaining a brand new audience. How do you feel about that, those films in particular?
Well, the head of editorial, I think, at Shout Factory is an old buddy of mine. He used to be one of the guns at editorial Warner Brothers for tapes, videotapes, and then DVDs, named Michael Finnegan. And he's a fan of those movies. Those 3 movies are, I don't know, man. I had a great time making them all, and they were all in different ways not only fun to make, but there were sort of instrumental changes in my career, and I could. There's a lot of crappy movies I've made, and those three aren't three of them. And by the way, a guy from my home state, Texas, just interviewed me about Shakedown as really the last big action movie in Manhattan when Manhattan was dirty.
Yeah.
And what I mean by dirty was like crime-filled, 42nd Street was not Disney-fied. You could walk down Fifth Avenue and get mugged. Before the whole Giuliani transformation, Bloomberg transformation, which is a better deal now, but still it was like Manhattan was like you were taking your life in your hands to walk Manhattan in those days. And Shakedown sort of is the cherry on the the claim to fame of New York when it was tough.
Oh, definitely. I've actually spoken to James Glickenhaus, the director of that movie, as well as sort of Bill Lustig and Larry Cohen, a lot of the cats who were making kind of movies in New York when New York was sort of at its gritty edge, but making those kind of fun genre movies as opposed to something like Taxi Driver, which is obviously a bit more serious. But Shakedown is just phenomenal. I mean, talk us through shooting on 42nd Street, shutting it down, and doing that kind of bike and sidecar stuff that you do with Sam.
Unbelievable, man. It's a couple of days I'll never forget. And, people say, really, you shut down 42nd Street, Times Square? I said, yeah. And me and Sam on a motorcycle in a sidecar. But, Sam and I had to have security, because all those crack dens and drug houses, prostitution houses, all that stuff, man, porn shops, all the scene was still vibrant and alive. And we shot in a couple of them. So when we were walking from the Winnebago to the set, we had to have security with us.
Oh, wow. So you did obviously a lot of action genre films, or films that certainly had elements of action in them, but also often tell another story, often tell either a story about the law or a story about the future or satirical or whatever it is. What appeals to you? Do you like action movies as a genre, or was it more sort of the content of the scripts that kind of appealed to you?
No, of unknown origin, I just like George Cosmatos, and I liked his idea, and we reworked that script whereby it was sort of a replication of Rats and People. Yeah. And subsequently, I just liked what that was about. It was based on this thing called A Visitor, a short story. I think that Alien was also based on, where one thing gets in your life, and your life is claustrophobic, and proceeds to destroy your life inside and out. Not only the physical life, but your psychological life. So that just appealed to me for the psychological drama of it, and also as a one-man show. Yeah. And I needed to star in a film, and I'd finished, Just Tell Me What You Want and Shoot the Moon, one of the great feminist movies. Shoot the Moon. I was just discussing it the other day with the same guy, Michael Finnegan, about Diane Keaton's power in that, because Albert Finney just passed away, and and he was a dear guy, a great actor, and a friend forever. And but right after that, I said I got to start a movie, and when that came along, a Warner Brothers film, another Warner Brothers film, I said sure, and I jumped at it because of the uniqueness of it, and I'm really happy that it's coming back out. My wife loves it. There's an actor friend of mine, Peter Riegert. It's one of his favorite movies. And, when you get into your mid-career, you don't want to look at your younger stuff. And Riegert told me 2 movies. He's a star of Animal House. And he said, man, you made 2 movies that were phenomenal, man, phenomenal. I said, what? He says, just tell me what you want. I said, well, just tell me what you want. I said, I can't watch that. And he says, well, you're still friends with Ally McGraw, but that's one of the great. That's based on William Wycherley. It's a comedy of manners. That's Moliere, man. You got to see Moliere and Wycherley in that. You're a theater guy, and so I go back and look at it, and I go, God, it's a pretty good movie. And also, he's of unknown origin. He just thinks it's hysterical. He thinks that, Of Unknown Origin is like a masterpiece. And sometimes I look at it with his eyes. Yeah. I haven't seen it about a year, and I think, okay, maybe it is. It is funny.
Well, there's a couple of things about it, I think. In a weird way, it comes off almost as a comment on the yuppie culture of the 80s, in a weird way, if you want to look at it that way.
No, it does, man. It does. That's what Cosmatos transformed it into.
Yeah.
That's what he really wanted it to. He wanted a me generation movie, of self-obsession with stuff and money,
Yeah.
to go south. And, that was his thing about it. I was more interested in the science of it, about the rats and the survival movie.
Yeah.
But Cosmatos, bless his heart, really wanted it about that, what you just said, like youth, on the greed go.
Yeah, I mean, everything in it that he should be interested in at the beginning of the movie just falls apart because of what goes on in the brownstone with the rat. And talking about the science of it, you give that amazing rat soliloquy at the dinner table, which is just perfect. What did you feel when you first read that, and how do you kind of prepare for a piece like that? Just kind of a one-shot deal.
I wrote that.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. That's very cool.
I have to just honestly tell you that, once I got into the dialogue with Cosmatos about the emblem of the rat as a human being, and found out that there are as many rats on planet Earth and in any particular society as there are people. They replicate, and they absolutely mirror the population of people. And they do have transgender rats and all kinds of jazz, man.
Yeah.
So once I just read that little bit, then I started researching. I said, George, when we were prepping it, I said, George, this dinner table, this conversation, which was sort of this, it was written like that. The guy's aloof and not in it, and essentially concerned with the rats. I said, it'd just be great if he just comes out with this info. And George said, great, let me hear it. I wrote it down. We rehearsed it, and so that was me and George. And I think it, not to toot my horn, and I certainly won't, but with George's assistance, I said that's what we're missing, man. We're missing what the rat is.
Yeah.
Subsequently, that it can destroy me. Otherwise, it's just an animal. Otherwise, it's just another it's the shark or the alien or whatever.
Right.
But if the rat is the human being in us all, then that speech needs to be there, and he agreed, and that's how it got the movie.
Oh, it's one of my favorite scenes, man. Such a great, perfect encapsulation of the whole movie before, and obviously, as you say, sets up the real threat that this rat is, as opposed to just being an animal in a brownstone, as it were. And you would go on to work with George Cosmatos again on Leviathan. What was it like working with George? What was it about him that kind of drew you to him?
Well, George got me into, I owe George a lot of things. One of which is that he got me, my interest in Renaissance art. My interest in art comes from Ali McGraw. My interest in Renaissance comes from another famous guy, one of the great cinematographers, Vittorio Storaro, who turned me on to Giotto when we were talking about art in Japan, and he chastised me that I didn't know who Giotto was or had never seen the very first narrative film on with depth and feeling and passion and color, and which is in Padua in the Arena Chapel. That I'd never seen that, so we could talk about art. And then once I started, getting into this, then George is the guy that said, you got to read this book about really an encapsulation about the Renaissance, and you got to go study it, man. You got to get out, because we made Leviathan in Rome, and when I was in Rome with him, I'd met a guy named Corey Brennan, who's now head of Rutgers Archaeology and Humanities and Classics, and he was a punker with the Lemonheads at Harvard. And
right.
I met him actually. I met him actually because he was like, I was up at the American Academy in Rome while I was making Leviathan with George. And George, I met a couple of artists and so forth. And George sent me up there. George sent me up everywhere. He said because George is a real classical enthusiast, a real art enthusiast, a culture enthusiast, man. And he sent me up to the American Academy to hear some lectures and whatever. And I heard this guy just driving this guitar, man. It sounded like a combination of Eddie Van Halen and Hendrix put together, and I ran a corner. It's a nerd with glasses eating a sandwich, food falling out of his mouth while he's just dry picking, on a Stratocaster, and I said, man, what do you do? He says, well, actually, I'm an archaeologist. I go, well, it looks to me like you're a rocker, man. He says, well, I do that too, but he's the guy that took me on these digs while I was making Leviathan in Rome, and I got into ancient Rome. I started collecting the coins. I got into fascinated and obsessed with late Republic and early Empire Rome through George and Corey while I was making that Leviathan. But then afterwards, George, who is a wonderful guy and wonderful to work with. I loved him. He was loud, but a driving, fascinating ideologue of a dude. Said, you got to read Manchester's A World Lit Only by Fire. You got to read his testimony of Magellan going around the world and what the Renaissance really was, in terms of discovery. You got to get a degree. Go study again, man. You got too much of a mind. So he was one of the dudes who really inspired me to go back and get my MFA in Florence.
Oh, wow.
And it was all from Leviathan. And somebody came up to me and said, have you seen Leviathan? He says, because your time in Rome is certainly seminal to your education in antiquities and art history. I said, man, I haven't seen Leviathan in 30 years. And I said, this friend of mine, he's not in the movie business, but he likes movies. He says it's a highly entertaining movie. Highly entertaining.
Yeah, it's great. It's like one of those, it's like an Alien or it's like The Thing or something. It's a great ensemble cast, really strong ensemble cast.
Wonderful cast, man.
Yeah, just the best.
With Elizondo and Danny and everybody. Richard Crenna, yeah. Amanda Pays, yeah. Wonderful guy, people to work with.
And awesome effects as well. I mean, between that and a little bit of Unknown Origin, and obviously in Screamers, you're working with a lot of different effects, a lot of different effect styles. Screamers comes out at that pivotal point just as CGI is taken off, but still while they're doing great map paintings and model work and animation and stuff. What's your relationship with like special effects as an actor? Like, how do you like them, or do you find it difficult to kind of interact and make that leap?
Well, the first dude that I ever the production designer of Buckaroo Banzai, Michael, oh man, what a beautiful dude. Michael, I'm blanking on his last name, genius. And he was a guy that really started speaking to me about what mats were, and the first time I ever really encountered it was with Phil Tippett, the great Phil Tippett, Lucas's guy in Robocop. And he was doing stop motion animation, and Phil is very instructional. And he instructed me so much about it that, I became fascinated with it. All these guys like Stan Winston, they were great people, man, and very easy to work with and very respectful of actors. There's nobody that really got pushy. So I hear some of these stories of the FX dudes taking over the set and essentially, dominating the vibe, the actors, the whatever. It wasn't me, man. I got to work with some of the greats, and they were all really great to me.
Yeah, and the end results are just fantastic. I love those movies from the early mid-90s, like Screamers, that have an amalgam. Like nowadays, it's sort of all CG, and when you go back a long, long ways, it's sort of all stop motion. But sort of in that middle, there's that wonderful just playing with all the different elements, and it sort of adds up to a far more interesting and rich look to a film.
I think it does too. I'll get to Screamers in a minute, but when I was doing Star Trek Into Darkness, my first scene, it was around the table where I announced that Khan is loose, and all of a sudden the whole conference table of the Admiralty is taken down by Benedict Cumberbatch in a mini capsule that he stole, and he starts shooting lasers. Okay, the beautiful thing is we shot that in 3 days. JJ's just one of the most terrific guys ever, and inventive as heck, and he's got like $100,000 mock-up of a space capsule out there firing lasers at us. And we're going to break the windows. We're going to destroy the place with that thing hanging out the window. And I'm thinking, like, gosh, doesn't have a green screen up there. And he said, it was great. And that he said, I got to do, 80 days of green screen, $80 million of the green screen. He says, I'm kind of tired of it. The more live action I could put back in a movie, the better. I'm shooting this on film, even though, all three cameras, the digital cameras, look exactly the same as film. I just chose film because I don't want I just want maybe this to be the last film, but he shot another film on 35 millimeter too, on 35 millimeter celluloid. But the thing is, he wanted like reality, and he didn't want to turn it all over to special effects. And good for him, man.
Yeah.
And subsequently, the acting, when they were acting, there was that thing out there shooting lasers at us. I mean, they're fake lasers, and blowing up stuff, and it was fun to act in. You get a green screen. I have to tell you, after a while, what are you doing, really?
Yeah.
You're just up there pretending. Now, Screamers, only because it's a Philip K. Dick, based on Philip K. Dick's short story. Bad title, great movie. I had one of the most fantastic times I ever had making that movie. I'm really proud of that movie, what that movie is. Even though we changed the circumstances of it, it still has the feel and dedication and drive and theme of Philip K. Dick, which is almost like, mystic Easternism, whereby the things you make have their own conscience because you made them. There's a Zen thing in them. It's George Drive Electric Sheep, all sorts of stuff. But that thing, the second variety, even though it was written during the Cold War, and you got the sides, we changed up the sides to be corporate identities rather than national identities. Still, the notion that you make machines and those machines will develop on their own, yeah, that's science fiction, but indeed there is a Einsteinian and Zen theme in that if your mind made it, your mind, it can evolve with your mind or be destroyed by your mind. And I loved Streamers, man. I loved the movie. I just, American Cinematique had a review. They said, what movies you want to review? I said, I want to do the New Age and Streamers. Syracuse invited me to a review of my stuff, and I did the same thing. I did the New Age and Streamers. I did a small movie based on Goethe's Faust called Shadow Hours. But yeah, I mean, I love Streamers. I think it's a terrific movie. I think Christopher did a great job with it too, man.
And in that movie, your character is sort of a lover of classical music and antiquities. I think you're holding a coin at the beginning that you're looking at.
That's right.
Is that all you?
Yeah,
Did you bring some of that in?
That's my own coin. Yeah. It was the idea when it was originally written and then being redeveloped. Once again, we didn't really rewrite it so much as just redevelop it and structure it. Christopher said, okay, what are we going to add here with you, man? And I said, music and art, man. That's the only two things I had going here, bro. So that's what he added. And I brought in my own coin. That's my own coin. That's Egypta Capta. I don't know. It's not a sestertius. It's something like a drachma. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're also a jazz musician. And how do you think like the jazz rhythms that you're playing or the music that you know so well does it inform your dialogue or your monologues at all? I always feel like you have great control on how words should sound and where the emphasis should be when you're performing.
I don't know. Well, being around jazz musicians, my mother was a jazz musician. My grandmother's a piano teacher. By the way, when I hang up this phone, I got to practice for a gig. I got to play in a week anyway. But yeah, I don't know. The rhythm of jazz is always, it's endemic to me now because it's what I grew up with. So I don't necessarily know if that's just buried in me unconsciously, but jazz is in me all the time. And my dialogue is always filled with jazz idioms. Like Tom Hanks, if someone asked me, you say man a lot, and I had to say, because my mother said man and cool and solid and all this stuff even before the surf generation. Yeah. And cats and all that stuff. So it still is, my riff is still filled with jazz, man. So I appreciate that.
those words are still floating around. I think I use them, and some of my friends use them. They still come about. So just sort of one last thing on Shakedown quickly, and then a couple more questions if you've still got time, if that's all right, Peter. Okay, great. So on Shakedown, just because as I said, I've spoken to James Glickenhaus, kind of what was working with James like, and George Cosmatos and James, they have very sort of particular sensibilities that kind of go throughout all their films. Were there any similarities? What was like working with James and George in that regard?
Well, extrinsically, circumstantially, they're about as different as night and day. I mean, one guy is like a Greek, Italianified immigrant with a Mediterranean, historiography in him. The other guy comes from one of the oldest stockbrokerage houses in Manhattan. Is like a silver spoon Manhattanite rich boy. But you take that away, you take away the facade, you get two guys who have the drive and passion of art collectors. Glickenhaus is an art collector. He's fascinated. He's got one of the great Picasso self-portraits in the world. You could talk to him all day about the design of Pininfarina and Ferraris, postmodern art, man. You could talk to Cosmatos about those very things. So the thing that I would say that drives them both is they're both very energetic guys and really, really passionate about their stuff and like kids. And by the way, that's another thing that really turns me on about directors. I mean, that's the thing that's great about J.J. Abrams. It was great about Mike Nichols, Sidney Lumet. They were never jaded, no matter how tough it got. They never took the thing for granted. I always felt in their presence, all of them, including Glickenhaus and Cosmatos, that we were just going to have a ball. And this was all like just a gift. And the gratitude that effused from Glickenhaus and Cosmatos to be on a movie set, to be making a movie, to be with me and Sam Elliott doing this thing was just infectious.
Yeah.
So and the same thing with George.
And it definitely comes across in the final piece. Obviously, another iconic director you worked with was Cronenberg with Naked Lunch. It's obviously a really weird, iconic, esoteric film. What is it like to make a film like that? And how do you keep it all in your head? And how would you wind down at the end of a day's shooting?
I didn't wind down. I have to tell you that, as a recovering drug addict and alcoholic, I don't mind telling you that, blown my own anonymity. But Burroughs' Naked Lunch was like a Bible to me in the '60s, and then what Time Life called it, one of the 10 most influential books of the 20th century. A revisit of Gulliver's Travels, of fantastic satire, fantasy of foibles and misgivings of society. When Cronenberg was going to do that book, I wrote him a letter. I said, this book means this to me, and then we met. And in New York, and all we talked about was Formula One racing, and then we did the movie. But I was going through a very, very, very low period in my personal life. I just broke up with a fiance who I was crazy about, but I realized I could not marry because I basically, some years later, wisdom teaches you that I just was not ready to be married, and I had no clue about what I was doing. I had to pull the plug on it. It was killing me, man. And I hung with that sadness, I think, and sometimes depression for about a year. And it was during that time I was making Naked Lunch. So there was no up or down. Cronenberg even said, this all seems, this descent. And, Naked Lunch, the way that Cronenberg did it, you can't make Naked Lunch. People tried to make Naked Lunch. I mean, you got to make Naked Lunch as an adult animated movie, almost like, Roger Rabbit or something. But Cronenberg was more interested in not the Naked Lunch thread. I mean, not the Naked Lunch narrative, of which there's hardly any. It's more like vignettes. But Cronenberg put the narrative together of how Burroughs came to write Naked Lunch through the accidental drug-induced assassination of his wife, playing William Tell, and then subsequently his desire to escape that into narcotics, which he was already messing around with. Then his adventure into narcotics is like an adventure and not just a drug habit, which he is the only guy to really do that with. I mean, he pursued these South American phantasmagorical, like yahe, these hallucinogens, and LSD-5 and so forth. I mean, he literally was the test baby for about every illegal government drug and a street drug known. But when he began to keep records of it, he's also like a philosopher, and he's a savant, almost like an idiot savant. I mean, the idiocy in him is a drug addict. The savant in him is that he records it, and through that gauze, invents a mirror of society's treachery and betrayal to itself and its denigration. And so Naked Lunch is that. You can't make a movie. But Cronenberg, writing the thread of how Burroughs came to write it, was genius. The Morocco and so forth with Paul and Sally Bowles, with Ian Holm and Judy Davis. And Judy Davis, one of the great, maybe a genius.
Oh, just incredible, yeah.
I think she's a genius, man. And then I did The New Age with her. So doing Naked Lunch was my way out of hell. It was my catharsis out of my own personal hell. Just like it was such a mirror to me. It was like Burroughs' writing was his way of writing, and he said it over and over again. It's the only way I can get out of this hell of having killed my wife and the amends I can make. Okay, my doing it was it's not even like I don't have to go very far to go. You know what? Doing that film in Canada. After I'd circumnavigated the globe doing 50-50 in Malaysia, I just kept on going.
Yeah.
And up in Toronto, I didn't come back to L.A. for a year. I did not return to Los Angeles for 1 year. And there I was in Canada making a movie, man, and I got out of hell. I got out of jail, man, by making that movie.
So you were like the only man for the job, really?
I was, man, and Cronenberg would say, like, this is very accessible to you. He says, I know your drug experience it is, but, man, the emotional downer, I said, yeah. It's all right there at my fingertips, man.
Yeah, I know. Like a lot of people always talk about Cronenberg with like the body horror, the effects and stuff, but actually it's sort of Cronenberg's characters and emotions and stories that he's telling that are really fascinating underneath all of that. Yeah,
true. It's true.
So one last question then, sir. I have to thank you again for your generosity with your time. But a few years back on my film review show, my co-host and I did a running series called Woods and Weller, where we would pick one of your movies and one by James Woods, as you were both two of our favorite actors. While we can never find, I think you starred in an HBO movie maybe together, but you mentioned on Kevin Pollak's chat show that you had known James Woods for a while. Like, I couldn't find anywhere that you had mentioned it other than here. Is that true? Have you known James Woods for a long time? And we were surprised, but really happy to find that out.
Well, I would say this, as they say in jazz, I have known Jimmy Woods since before he was white.
Right.
which is a Black American jazz idiom that means before a jazz guy ever made any money. White being the metaphor for commercial music, right? Right.
Yeah.
So I've known Jimmy that long. Jimmy was in Moon Children while I was in Sticks and Bones. And that was in 1973.
Wow.
We came up in the theater together. I mean, he got movie breaks before anybody, and he's a gifted guy. And one of the smartest guys ever. Completely hysterically nuts. And entertaining is... here's the thing, is that I flew out to New York in right after Thanksgiving, November. And I flew out to see this play called Travisville about Dallas, Texas, and essentially the buying of the civil rights problem by Texas by this great guy. There's great actors on a TV show, and he wrote this thing for Ensemble Studio Theater. Ensemble Studio Theater did plays there, and it's run by my friend William Carden, who also I came up in the theater with. Okay, there's a buddy of mine who's into high-tech companies, and his name is Dave Vitiello. He comes with me, and afterwards we go to that great brasserie downtown in the Village. I'm never going to remember the name of it, right? So I'm going to go in there in a second. Odeon. Not Odeon. It's owned by the same guy. It's owned by Keith, but it's not Odeon. We go into this place. It's like a barn. It looks like La Coupole in Paris. And my buddy runs it for a long time from the French Caribbean. The maitre d' said, "Are you sitting with Mr. Woods?" This is only 2 months ago.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen him in 8 years. I said, "No, but when Mr. Woods comes in, right, tell Mr. Woods that there's a Mr. Weller, Dr. Weller, would like to kiss him square on the mouth." He said, "Well, I'm not going to tell him that." I said, "Yes, you are. Right, and here's $20 to do it. Kareem, tell Mr. Woods when he walks in and my table is ready, I know he's sitting next to me, tell him yes, and Dr. Weller's here, and he would like to kiss you right on the mouth." And, okay, so he says, okay. And so I'm eating with my friend William Carden, and David Dillon. All of a sudden, I hear this voice, unmistakable, go, "I'm here. Where's the kiss?" I mean, loud as can be. In this, I'm here. Where is it, Weller? I'm waiting. And I stand up and kiss that guy right on the chops, man. Then he immediately turns to William, who he knows a little bit. David has no idea. He doesn't care. He goes, "You know how long I've known him? I've known him. Let me see. You didn't even have sex when I knew you. You didn't even have pubic hair when I knew you, right?" He's just going into this whole thing, man. And that's how long I've known him and loved him. Known him. He's a gift, and he's a long-time friend, man. Long-time friend. And a gifted guy, man. I mean, you watch Casino, I can't take my eyes off him.
Oh, he's so good in Casino.
He's in The Way We Were. He's great in that.
Yeah.
I mean, all sorts of stuff, man.
No, I mean, because we didn't know, because obviously sort of the theater stuff and a lot of that stuff pre the movies we were covering, which were mainly kind of your 80s and 90s movies, we didn't know of that relationship. So to find out about that afterwards, I just wonder what was going through what forces were at play that made us pick you guys and do a whole series. We did like 10 or 12 episodes on one Weller movie, one Woods movie, and to find out that you guys have known each other that long, and there must have been something going on, I guess, in the ether.
Yeah. Dennis Miller did an interview with me, I don't know, 20 years ago, something like that. And he said he was always fascinated with Weller, Woods, and Walken, and wondered if we hung. And, Christopher Walken was like my third friend in New York. I did 3 plays with him. And he really, and his wife, Georgianne, took me under wing and taught me a whole lot of stuff about the theater, about street life in New York, about how, blah, blah. And he comes from New York, he comes from Long Island City, and raised in New York and a dancer in New York. And he showed me a lot about New York, but he's not a hang guy. You go to Walken. He doesn't search you.
Right.
But Woods is a hang. I mean, that's a different deal. As much as Walken befriended me and showed me a whole lot of ropes, he also got me hired a couple of times. He's not a guy that's going to go, let's go out on the street and do something. He will say, like, come over to the house, something like that, because he's not a hangout dude. Whereas, but I did hang with him. I would go to bars with him once in a while. But Woods is a hang. Woods will go out to and do an evening, right?
Yeah.
And that's the great thing about Jimmy. Jimmy's like an unstoppable source of humor. I mean, I think he's made me laugh harder than anybody, maybe save Christopher Lloyd.
Wow, yeah. It would be, I mean, now you're saying Woods, Weller, and Walken. I'm like, okay, that's probably my dream cast for a movie. But
and Walken, what a gifted actor he is, man. You can't imitate that guy. And funny thing is that, if you think he's strange, and he's from Mars, he thinks that, Christopher Lloyd is the strangest guy on planet Earth.
Yeah.
And Christopher Lloyd's another long-time friend who I still hang with and see. And he's got a genius IQ. I mean, he's got 180 plus IQ, and he's from quite a wealthy family in Connecticut. And he's a total blue blood, Christopher Lloyd. He looks like an axe murderer. He doesn't look like a genius intellectual,
right.
Member of Mensa. He looks like a guy who, sold, illicit guns, in the Lower
right.
East Side of Manhattan, man. But it's interesting because he is fascinating.
Yeah.
And Walken would call him your strange friend, Peter. I saw your strange friend Lloyd. He's very strange. Think like, okay, that is the pot calling the kettle a pot, man. Right
yeah,
there.
no, definitely. And of course, Walken worked with Glickenhaus in McBain. They did McBain together. So yeah, that's
that's right. That's right.
That's crazy. I think
right.
that was after Shakedown, though. I think.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. But it's been such a pleasure.
And let me give a shout out
to
Stan. Let me give a shout out to Sam Elliott, who's nominated for an Oscar, and I got to direct him in Justified too. One of the great gentlemen ever. One of the great gentlemen, and fun to work with, man. A great guy, and a great guy to direct. I got to direct him like 3 years ago in the last season of Justified. So, just wonderful.
Yeah, well, I just covered that movie he did, Hero, which is great, and also The Man Who Killed Hitler and then The Bigfoot, which sounds like a crazy B-movie, but it actually, Elliot in that gives one of the strongest and most powerful emotional performances I've seen. It's so good. His solo performance in that is just tremendous. Weird B-movie name, but such a great movie, and really explores a whole bunch. Like if you haven't seen it already, if you get a chance to see The Man Who Killed Hitler and then The Bigfoot, I can't recommend it highly enough. I think it would definitely be something you'd enjoy. And Elliot's just amazing in it.
Okay.
Yeah,
very good, man.
Definitely, man. Check it out. Well, look, thanks so much, Peter. Dr. Weller, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show. It's been a long dream of mine to talk to you, so thanks so much for your time today. It's really generous and great of you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, dude. All the best. Take care.
All right, bye.
So if you enjoyed that interview and you like all that the After Movie Diner puts out, don't forget you can support us over at Patreon, patreon.com/After Movie Diner, or indeed click on the Amazon banner on our website, aftermoviediner.com, when you do your shopping on Amazon at no extra cost for yourself, but we will be supported. So thanks so much for listening to that interview. Check out the other interviews on Booth Talk and the rest of our content over at aftermoviediner.com.